Welcome to Stoa Conversations. My name is Caleb Ontiveros, and today I'm speaking with Sam Alaimo. Sam is a former U.S. Navy SEAL. He's got a master's from Columbia, and he writes at whatthen.org, and is a co-founder at Zero Eyes. So a very busy man. Thanks for joining.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
So what's your story? Broad question, I know, but how do you describe yourself? How do you describe your work?
I started writing at whatthen.org early last year. I've always loved the idea of writing down my thoughts. It was never about the writing; it was about the living and the thinking and the studying, and then writing as a means to solidify that and then communicate that. And going public was super difficult for me. The community I came from, the military, you typically don't have social media. You typically don't go public. That was back in the day. It has changed, obviously. And I dipped my toe in the water, just putting some initial thoughts out there early 2024, and then just fell in love with the rhythm of it. Like the weekly cadence, there's something significant about it where you can get on a rhythm and continually, perpetually create new material and then keep digging deeper and then questioning. And each essay could be a different riff on a particular topic. And then you could begin to ping it from different angles. And it became just this complete passion project to the point where I started out primarily doing Stoicism. Then it branched into this sort of metaphysical exploration I have of an idea I'm working on in my book at the moment. We can get into that later on, but I realized you don't have to contain yourself to one niche focus. You could basically go wherever your interest and wherever your ideas are taking you. And if it's compelling enough, if you're adequate enough at a writer, and I try to be, you can develop a solid base of people who not only just read it but give you feedback. And that's the best part about it. You're getting live feedback. Whereas with a book, you can spend 3 years writing it and then maybe get feedback when it's all done. You're going to know real quick when you do a Substack or a weekly newsletter if that has any redeemable qualities whatsoever. And then you can begin to adapt and you become a better thinker at the end of the day. So it's been a wild ride so far.
Very nice. Yeah, I think it can be easy to write something, push it out, and you don't get a lot of feedback. And perhaps even the exercise of writing itself didn't feel that valuable, wasn't that enjoyable. But I think that something comes out of doing that again and again that you don't, and this is probably true for any habit, that you don't get from those initial forays. So I think that's a good reminder from what you just said.
Yeah, I love it. I love the iterative capacity. And just seeing where it goes over time. So it's not even been 2 years, but the vacillations between the subjects I focus on, this watching my style change over time, like that in itself is totally worthwhile. When you think about most writers, most thinkers, a lot of them, you often don't even hear about them until they're in their 50s or 60s. So when you start when you're relatively young, a year is nothing. A year is just, it's 1/20th of what it's going to be by the time you actually hit your stride with your particular idea or focus or style or voice or tone. So that is exciting in and of itself because you're accumulating all this work that over time you're going to be able to look back on and say, wow, my mind used to go there. Look how it's changed. Maybe I got better. Maybe I got worse in this way. It's almost like the value of keeping a journal. You begin to see how your mind works over time. And in that way, you're able to make significant changes in the positive way you want to make them. So yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm going to keep going as long as I can.
Well, how do you describe Stoicism these days? What's your, how do you think about it? Has it changed since you began writing or since you first encountered it?
Yeah, very much so. I first understood there was such a thing as Stoicism as a study, as a philosophy, after I got out of the military. And it was super helpful because when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the mud, when you're in a combat situation, you embody many core Stoic principles without knowing that it is Stoicism. And then when I got out, when a lot of people I know got out, they experienced this void. Like all of a sudden, ease is far harder to deal with than hardship. And Stoicism kind of swoops in there and it codifies, it puts to words what we already knew. And it makes sense because if you look at Epictetus, he wasn't preaching to slaves. He was preaching to the wealthy aristocratic sons of wealthy and influential Romans. So Stoicism itself is built for an affluent society that is experiencing existential boredom and meaninglessness. Like that's why it was invented. You didn't have pre-state tribes who did Stoicism. They lived it. They didn't need the philosophy. So it's a major thing now because the world we've invented, this modern world, the West, like all the exceptional things that we value, think freedom, affluence, luxury, privilege, they also have really destructive potential as well because they divorce you from reality. They divorce you from hardship. They divorce you from the very things like injury, pain, death, etc., that make you completely ingrained in the present moment and very grateful when you get to survive the night, or very grateful when you get the
Mhm.
warmth of a fire. All of a sudden, the minor things become major things, wonderful things. And Stoicism is a great way of reminding you, hey, you have a very lucky position and it could very well turn back on you unless you learn how to use it well. So like when it comes down to Stoicism, I'm not a Stoic in the same way I'm neither a Democrat or a Republican. Like I don't subscribe to every single aspect of Stoicism, but the
Mhm.
core pillars of Stoicism on how to live a better life. Yes, I'm all about that. It's literally life changing philosophy.
Absolutely. Yeah. The point about affluence makes me think about, Musonius Rufus, Epictetus scolding their students, hammering their rich aristocratic Roman students for having so much luxury. And if you think about today, even the typical American, it's got the equivalent of hundreds of slaves worth of energy at their fingertips. And I think they would be harsh on us too, even if you're not in so-called economic state of elite in a developed country. So
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely true.
yeah. The value in there is it's a really awesome way to put it. I never thought about the value of an iPhone in terms of the number of slaves, but you're absolutely right. I wonder what an LLM would be. How many slaves is that? Is that 2 million slaves? How do you value
Yeah. Yeah, that's difficult. I think that's a difficult matter. I think yes, people think about that in terms of employees or assistants, but I have thought about, and I don't know the best way to put this, but there is a sense in which the LLM is, you don't have the ethical qualms that you do with
that?
having an employee. You can have it do whatever you like, but it still has the same kind of risks and affordances, um, in the sense that you might go to it in the same way you might go to an employee to solve issues you should solve by yourself. And it has its own, it doesn't literally have its own interests, but it's going to have its own patterns that might not be aligned with yours in the same way. Leading employees requires some amount of leadership, ensuring that your own interests are served rather than the LLMs or the producers of these LLMs.
Yeah, that sends my mind in a different direction. Having a slave, that's obviously horrific for the slave and then terrible for you as well. But the LLM it's a different nuance on that. You're not hurting another person, but depending on the use to which you're putting the LLM, like focusing on it just from the perspective of a writer, or let's even better, a student. If you have people keep saying that you had the printing press and you had the books and you had the internet. How is this any different? Well, it's radically different because none of those things could think for you. And if you have a student who's never had to research an essay, never had to decide what to put in the essay, never had to rewrite it, never had to think through it. What is my argument? What are my points? What are my conclusions? Do I know I'm right? How do I know I'm right? You're literally crippling the capacity for critical thinking. Nothing in history has ever done that before at that scale. That is the part that there's a lot of good that AI can do. I'm a fan of AI. But when it comes down to what it can do to stunting the human mind, that's the part that's fascinating. And that's the part that I think more and more people are going to be waking up to, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it is a bit of a detour, but it's such an interesting topic, and I do think it does have that potential to, by replacing thinking, stunt the human mind. Absolutely.
Well, it ties into Stoicism. What does Epictetus say? You assent, you dissent, you withhold judgment. How do you do that unless you're able to read the situation and think? And if
Hmm.
you're relying on an LLM to give you your argument, your reasons, and your conclusion, how are you able to even get to the point where you can assent or dissent or withhold judgment effectively? You have crippled literally the capacity that all of Stoicism is based off of, which is human reason, which is God, which is everything. That to me is it's literally a war on reason, if it's used in sort of the educational capacity we're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is this skill of knowing how best to use an LLM, and that requires, responding to your impressions with respect to whatever it's feeding you, whatever you're, and then reflecting on what you ought to ask. But I still think there is this and perhaps the analogy to other people is useful. Seneca has a case in a letter where he talks about um, a man who uses his slaves as his memory and shows off his slaves reciting poetry and such, and sort of claims them as his own. Like I think that's a kind of failure mode that using other people, using tools can lead you towards.
Yeah, that man pretty much condemns himself in every way, shape, and form.
Yes, absolutely. So thinking about, I think the Stoics that's influenced the most is probably Epictetus. Is that fair to say?
For me personally,
Yeah, for you personally.
yeah, we had 99%. It would be Epictetus, and the 1% would be Seneca and Rufus and Marcus.
What is it that stuck out to you about the man and his work?
Yeah. Again, I don't agree with everything in the Stoic universe, um, but his passion, his energy, absolute brilliance, the way he utilizes dialogue, hypothetical syllogisms, and his intent, it could not have been more nobler than anybody else. Like Marcus Aurelius are unique because it's to him. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
pull back, um, be aware now. Don't make anything too significant. You're going to be dead soon. Like standard, hey, just you're an emperor. You have a lot of power. Keep that under control. And then you had Seneca, who extraordinarily wealthy, a lot of influence. His was sort of like an aristocratic playing with it, but Epictetus was real. He made himself the most extreme example you can. He lived on a pallet. He had a clay lamp, and that was it. That was his life. He had his beard. He had his cloak, and he didn't give a damn about anything else. He made himself the most extreme example. There's no hypocrisy in that man whatsoever. Not only that, he never even called himself a Stoic. He never even called himself a philosopher. Like that is the most, and nobody else in the world ever deserved to be called a philosopher more than Epictetus. So like just reading his words, you get a feel for him as a human being and just how intensely passionate and aware and grateful you could be. Um, and it ties into like the way he thinks. He himself lived extreme, but he also pushed the boundaries of human thought in the most extreme manner possible. The thing on the wall behind me, hey, thought I noiktai, the door stands open. Like he literally was the first existentialist in a way. And he would use the door stands open to basically say, you think that, how can you think that you could be forced into doing anything, into
Mhm.
thinking anything, into being anybody's slave, into not having the power of choice when the door stands open? Hypothetically, if you want to, you can end your life, which means you choose to be here and you choose to be a slave and you choose to be miserable. He went that full boundary between life and death to prove his point. You have choice in literally everything that happens in your entire life because you choose to exist. Once I understood he said that, I'm like, this is a fearless thinker who will go anywhere and is absolutely unequivocally correct. You can't refute that argument. If you can, I've never heard it, but his intensity, his mercilessness, his grit, and then on top of all that, underlying all that is his caring. He cares. He genuinely gives a damn.
He's like the Stoic coach that's after you, but for a good reason, and you know that his passion is grounded in his in who he was and his own character. It's not a performance. I think that
No,
comes through Arian's notes. Absolutely.
no. I wonder about that too. So there's a thinker. What's his name? Dobbin. So Dobbin is under the impression, if I remember correctly, I don't want to misquote anybody, that Epictetus actually did write the discourses, and it was just a fashionable thing to make it appear as though someone else did. And like, if I have any opinion whatsoever, I learned Greek to a basic level, so I could read him in the original. That would be epic, because if you compare that writing compared to Arian's, it is a radically different set of writing. Now,
Mhm.
maybe Arian was just a brilliant writer and literally embodied the voice of Epictetus because the form and the structure, even the type of Greek he used, was different from what he typically used in his own writing. But like, how awesome would that be if this actually was Epictetus's writings? And we know he wrote. He said he wrote in his discourses, but that's just an interesting side thought there. Maybe it actually is his words. Who knows?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I haven't dove into that. Maybe I should. I think it's totally possible that it is
Yeah.
his. At least it seems absolutely likely that I think Arian copied his phrases to a high degree of fidelity. I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you? If you had to pick one of the majors, who would you pick?
Well, Marcus Aurelius was the one who stuck out to me first. I think it's because of his introspective nature, the meditations, of course. And I think if you read meditations, you see that there are these themes of Stoicism that everyone's able to pick out, focusing on resilience. But there's also this really grand perspective that's you could call it metaphysical, spiritual. There's, Marcus Aurelius is always talking about God, taking this view from above, that I thought was really striking. And that's something I've wrestled with in Stoicism. The Stoic idea of God, how that fits into everything. What first attracted me to philosophy was these debates, sort of traditional debates about the existence of God. So perhaps it's tied to that as well. But you have this picture of a man trying to do his best to live the Stoic life, and he's informed by both you get the sense he's informed by both the micro and the macro, as it were, those two aspects of, day to day overcoming temptations for a particular kind of food, reminding himself that it's a corpse, while also thinking of, I'm imbued with the same reason as the divine reason that, grounds all things. So I think that's my answer.
I've never got to talk to anybody about this. I'm very curious to hear what you think about it. Like Epictetus is self-evident in the respect that he literally lived his philosophy. Arguably, Seneca did not a lot, though he certainly died his philosophy. And then Marcus is interesting. You have a guy who's literally an emperor, literally waging war on an entire indigenous population, like the Germanic tribes. And at the same time, he's coming back to his tent at night and writing these very calm meditations about, what are you grasping for? Why aren't you just being present in the moment? Realize you're going to you're going to die soon. What's the point? How do you, when you think about him as a man on top of his philosophy, not just the beauty of his philosophy, how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's also the additional complication with his letters, where I think he seems much more personal in his letters to his tutor Fronto, and almost more mundane. Talking about they're not high flown discussions of philosophy, even though I'm sure they had them. Um, but I think it's always so hard to tease out who Marcus Aurelius was as a man. But I do think the general historical consensus that he was someone of upright character, a very serious person. He was picked out from a young age for the role, and was thought well of by Hadrian, of course, but also Antonius Pius. Um, I think that speaks to him as someone who certainly had political views that would have been in step with typical Roman views about Germanic tribes and such, um, but did have a kind of seriousness, probably earnestness to him that was not evident in other emperors, to say nothing of other Romans.
Yeah. It's just the history of Stoicism fascinating in and of itself for that reason. You have Epictetus, a dirt poor slave, and you have Marcus Aurelius, the emperor. Um, it's fun to unriddle that and how that impacts them in different ways. That's why Stoicism is fascinating. There really is no one Stoicism. Everybody
Mhm.
kind of took it and did something different with it over time, which makes sense. It has adapted with the times. I mean, it was adapted from the Greek to the Roman. In the Greek world, it was almost a withdrawal, and the Romans realized that in order to have a highly functioning, essentially a state at scale, you need to make sure that there's a sense of duty. You can't just withdraw into yourself. You have to have a duty for the body politic. So it was cool to see that shift. And then now it's having its own shift in this sort of renaissance of Stoicism in the 21st century. God only knows what will happen to it in a couple of decades, but it's kind of cool to watch.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's connected to this idea of, I don't know how much you've thought about Stoic rule ethics, but Epictetus is certainly large on this idea that you can get a sense of your duties. Out of the other Stoics, he doesn't talk about virtue as much.
No.
Um, but you can get a sense of your duties from the roles you occupy in your life, whether that's a neighbor, father, today we'd say maybe an employee, citizen, what have you. And these roles are going to be different from society to society, time to time. So I do think it has that a kind of adaptiveness to the philosophy that is, I think is just realistic, really, for making sense of the world. There are so many different kinds of people and situations that perhaps other philosophies that aims to make more general rules, universal rules, and such are going to not work as well.
Yeah. He definitely did not almost ever mention virtue. He was so commonsensical and so focused on just, hey, live a good life, be a good person. And even though he never said the word virtue, he makes it really clear what that means.
Hmm.
I think it is significant he doesn't say virtue. Um, the virtue is interesting, and like that word gets used a lot today. And I almost wonder if it was used a lot in his day. I almost wonder if he deliberately avoided it because he knew what difficult situations could demand of you. I don't know, I'm just kind of riffing on it. Like coming from a combat perspective, this, an ethicist would not make it 2 seconds. Like in the reality outside of the Western world, virtue takes on a totally different meaning. And to go in there with one set idea on what the right is very quickly goes out the window. And I
Hmm.
almost wonder if that's why Epictetus didn't go down the road of becoming a moralist in the sense of like, this is exactly how you ought to live. He was more pulling back the shades of bullshit to show you what not to do, which kind of leaves you with a broad path of what to do to be a decent person, live a good life. I almost wonder if that's what's going on there, but that's something I want to now think on for a couple of days because maybe there's something there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. There's I think on one hand you don't get sort of detailed universal prescriptions or condemnations about perhaps more controversial questions that you might get from, like I think about Musonius Rufus. He advises, he has some more specific recommendations about what people should do. He's sort of an early pronatalist. I don't think Epictetus makes those kinds. I could be forgetting some, but I don't think he makes that level of prescription. Everyone should have children or something of that sort. I mean, that specific case, I don't think he had any biological children. Um,
He didn't. He actually got mocked for that at one point because he kept
yeah.
telling everybody to have children. And one of the interlocutors said, "Sure, I'll marry your daughter."
um, he does, of course, admire a number of figures who took difficult, uncompromising stances, of course. So I think about Agrippinus, who wouldn't kneel before Nero in a variety of spectacles. And of course, he praises other senators resisting the demands of tyrants. So I think it's important to, I think Stoicism has, at once, it has a kind of flexibility of being able to adapt to different cultures. But at the same time, it also has this idea of, once you've identified an exemplar in a specific situation, that's what you need to attain now. And it's not going to be easy, and it may very well be on the extreme side of things.
Yeah, he made that clear. I mean, he talked about Socrates a lot. He talked about Hercules a lot, and he talked about people who did not meet a good end a lot. I think that was a
Hmm.
strategic choice of his. Say, if you prepare for the worst case, well, not only are you prepared for the worst case, but then the best case is awesome. You got lucky that you got to die a death of old age, as opposed to drinking hemlock, or getting beheaded or some horrible end. Uh, Even in that perspective, as a teacher, he's exceptional. People will study his discourses just to see how did he actually so effectively teach. And he had all these mechanisms, these hypotheticals. He used a lot of Socratic method. He constantly inverted everything. He was a brilliant teacher in and of itself. And to think that he maybe did that on the fly, like these are just his conversations. These weren't his formal teachings. The fact he could just riff like that on the fly with whoever happened to walk through his door, it must have been a sight to behold to see him in action, that energy and that vibrancy. I just can't even imagine what it must have felt like.
Oh yeah, energy, vibrancy. These are, I think, great words to capture it. I think sometimes Stoicism, people think it can have a kind of cold aspect to it, passive, not as active. But I think you can really see the life in someone like Epictetus. The demand. I think Stoic is an energetic. They're an energetic individual at their best. So I think Epictetus is a good example of that. Sometimes reading Marcus Aurelius, you get the sense that he's been energetic all day and now he's slowing down,
Yeah.
reflecting, and so that's a different pace, perhaps.
That's a huge caveat. It's like we're getting, especially Marcus Aurelius, because it could feel like if you just read that straight through, it could feel like a downer. But you're right. That's the end of the day. That's the end of the day of being an emperor. How much
Hmm.
he had to entertain and amuse and joke and deal with dramas. Um, I hear more and more people today when they really get deep into Stoicism, they take it too far. and they become apathetic in the worst sense, not in the good sense. They're apathetic in the sense where they almost just shut off, as opposed to like the original sense of no fear. And there's a radical difference between the two. Like if you read Epictetus, I think he's being extreme on purpose, just like Marcus Aurelius is, because Epictetus is being extreme in getting the person he's talking to from ratcheting it back a little bit. Hey, focus on what you're doing here. Don't get lost in politics or something, or seeking command or wealth or whatever. And Marcus Aurelius was doing that to himself. That doesn't mean that's all life is. It is a method and a tool. I agree with you. It's not meant to become cold. Like a lot of people are like, maybe Stoicism isn't right. It's not Stoicism. It's how you did it. It's meant to make life more vibrant and every second more colorful and vibrant if it's done the right way. Like if you read Epictetus with kind of in that mind, keeping in mind you're reading it and not hearing it, that's all the world of the difference. I have no doubt that if you listen to Epictetus, you would leave there with every neuron firing, ready to just get the fuck after it. Whereas if you just read it for 20 minutes straight, it could almost be like you just ratchet it down a little too far.
Yeah, that's a good point. You've mentioned a few times that you don't agree with all of Stoicism, which is, of course, a respectable position. What sorts of things do you want to call out as maybe places where you're uncertain or the Stoics got it wrong as you've been thinking through the philosophy?
Uh, when you think about it as an entire philosophy, like the metaphysics, I don't
Mm-hmm.
like the metaphysics are correct, like the fiery breath, all that stuff. I think it's a beautiful picture. I think it was an attempt at really vibrant minds of trying to go first principles. What is everything and why are we here? They did it in a beautiful way, just like the Old Testament did it in a beautiful way, just like a lot of other people have done it in a beautiful way. Do I think that's true? I don't think it's true. And then when you think about a lot of the duties that you find some duties in Epictetus. You find quite a few strong recommendations in Seneca. I'm not able to pull them off the top of my head, but it's stuff where if you take it too literally, it is taking a step back from life. It is a certain amount of withdrawal. Every time I eat the food I like a piece of watermelon, I don't want to remember I'm going to be dead. Or hey, you're not always going to have this. Or hey, this is too much luxury for me. I also kind of just want to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Practice is essential. Is it essential to do every second of every day? I don't think so. That's a good question. I wish I could have prepared beforehand because I took a strong stand and now I can't back it up. So I could probably pull up 30 different quotes of examples where listen, if this were part of the doctrine, I wouldn't do it. But the out is, again, there is no one Stoicism. Seneca's is very different from Epictetus, from Rufus, from Marcus, even though Marcus was influenced by Epictetus. But yeah, it's hard to just say that I'm that. Again, in the same way I can't say I'm a Democrat or a Republican because it comes with a lot of baggage. And if you want to be a single issue thinker, not just in politics, but in philosophy, I would not want to just adopt that and move on because there's aspects of existentialism I absolutely love and believe to be true. So does that mean if I'm a Stoic, can I also have existentialist beliefs? And if I'm a Stoic, what about the Aristotelian beliefs of what it means to have a good life, which is very different from what Epictetus says? So I'll side with that. I'll side with Aristotle that virtue isn't just enough. It's not it is necessary, but it's not sufficient for happiness. I
Mm-hmm.
do think you also need the other things in life. And if you're going to have a life of 60, 70, 80 years, it's probably nice to have some possessions. It's nice to have a small amount of wealth. It's nice to have a little bit of security. But at the same time, pressure test that with your philosophy. Practice the poverty as opposed to just being poor. Hopefully that gives you a good idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think going for the claim that virtue is not sufficient for a good life is certainly a challenge to the Stoics, and it's something a lot of aspirational Stoics, people interested in Stoicism, struggle with when they learn more about the philosophy because it is one of those radical. That's what distinguishes Stoicism. One of the key claims that distinguishes the Stoics from the rest of the Hellenistic, Greco-Roman philosophies and such.
Yeah, I could see that in the worst case situation. Think the Frankel situation, a concentration camp. At
Mm-hmm.
the end, as you're about to walk through the jaws of death, can you say virtue is sufficient and necessary? Then I think your argument's fine. But if you're not in the worst case, if you're not about to drink the hemlock like Socrates, or about to walk through the gates of Auschwitz, you can expand your horizons and attempt to live a more full life as opposed to living on the absolute edge all the time. That I think is where the absolute stand, I think, again, was more of a teaching mechanism than an actual practical application on how to live your day-to-day life, especially in the 21st century.
Mhm. Yeah. So the connection to existentialism is interesting. I do think there's a strong commonality in both philosophies take freedom seriously. They say we are more free than other philosophies. Perhaps common sense dictates we are. We're more responsible for our thoughts, actions, and such. So I do think there's a real similarity on that front. Though, of course, there are significant differences when it comes to the ultimate grounding of value and such.
Yeah, the freedom is like the foundation of it. Well, death and freedom are the foundations um, of existentialism, and then, not surprisingly, that's a major aspect of Epictetus. The good part about Stoicism is that they do give you a bit more than the existentialists. Like
Mm-hmm.
depending on which existentialist you're talking about, their primary focus is on um, you. You know you're going to die. You're born inherently free. You have to make up your own mind, and the universe is inherently meaninglessness. It's inherently meaningless. Like, it is a super dark message, and their whole point is, now what? Now you got to do something with it. And the whole goal of existentialism, or depending on which teacher you listen to, is the goal is authenticity. So how do you be your own human being, completely of your own volition, uninfluenced by what Nietzsche would call the herd? So, like, don't adopt what the collective's doing. Actually take a step back, acknowledge you exist, lean into what they would call existential anxiety, and then make your own path forward, owning that anxiety instead of just running in terror from the fact you're going to die. What is that if not stoicism? What is that if not practicing death? Because if you can master that, you're now here. You're now grounded. You're like this slab of being who've just owned your existence. And now you can move forward without being compelled, without doing it through fear or anxiety or deluding yourself. So I think that they're super, super linked, even though they're very different.
Mm-hmm.
Just existentialism is more, I see it as more of a destructive philosophy than stoicism, which both breaks you down and then tries to build you back up.
Yeah, I suppose they get to the same place with facing death. You have the ability to choose, and then the Stoics say, "Now choose in accordance with nature,"
Hmm?
or something to that effect. Or choose in accordance with the classical virtues, your roles. Whereas it depends existentialism, many different existentialists, and it's perhaps even a wider tent than the Stoic one. But they don't offer the same kind of guidance. It's no, you just have choice, and now choose.
Yeah, there's no living in accordance with nature with them, because to them the
Absolutely
universe
not.
is inherently meaningless. Like, I actually don't believe that. Like, to a certain extent, I do. From a scientific extent, yeah, it's a bunch of atoms and star matter, but at the same time, we we are meaning creating creatures, and the only way you do that is by engaging with your world. So, like, that's something I haven't figured out. Neither did they. Sartre couldn't be more dark about it. Life is miserable and wretched, and the universe doesn't mean anything. Good luck. I don't buy that. I like kind of the mixture of the two, and seeing the beauty. Like, I could look at the trees outside. That doesn't look meaningless to me. Is it technically just inanimate matter? Sure. But that's not how we exist. If it is, we could all just go lights out and be done with this whole thing. There's meaning out there, and we have to find it. And that's actually something I love writing about on my Substack.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no definitive answer on that yet. And that's something you could riff on all day and try to find that meaning, where others say it simply can't exist.
Yep. Well, one thinker you wrote about recently, a contemporary of Sartre, is Ernst Jünger.
Yeah.
Very fascinating figure, fascinating man. Not as well known, perhaps, I think, to our listeners. So I don't know if you could say some words about his biography, or what's the most salient parts to you.
Uh, he was well educated as a kid. Wasn't Joined the French Foreign Legion of his own volition as a teenager. When World War One happened, he became a commissioned officer in the German army. He went all the way through World War One. Absolutely incredible war record, like an absolute war hero in every sense of the word. And we can go back into that. When that was done, He leaned heavy into his philosophical beliefs, a lot of which were shaped in combat. Um, he became an entomologist, I believe, so he studied ants,
Hmm.
and like he had an opportunity in the early Hitler era. Like he was a German hero. Hitler admired this guy. He had nothing. He wanted nothing to do with Nazis. So he was given some high ranking post in Paris during World War II. And then when that was done, because he kind of never really got involved in the Nazi stuff, he finished out his days as a writer. But the, he's hard for me to grasp. It's like I don't. He wrote a lot of books. Some of them are super abstract, and like I go through 120 pages. Like what did he just say? But then he vacillates between that super abstract and then the super concrete. And when you read Storm of Steel, especially I don't know if you have like combat veterans out there, but the guys who've been to war, he becomes a phenomenologist of war, but he does
Hmm.
it from like a poet philosopher's perspective. So he's not just, hey, this is terrible. A lot of World War One memoirs are of absolute horrific wretchedness. There was no more bloody or destructive war in human history. It was brutal. But if you read it from Younger's perspective, it was a work of poetry in the best and the worst sense. Not that he was glorifying it. Like he wholeheartedly admitted just how bad it was, and he became fascinated because that was the first like truly mechanized industrial warfare. And he was fascinated that we are these flesh
Hmm.
and blood beings doing a metal war. So he would look at a human being compared to a tank, and a human being compared to a machine gun, and a human being compared to a mortar or a rocket. And it you could tell his fascination of the fact that we created war, war also created us. Every aspect of our minds and our bodies. And then when he would look at it especially trench warfare, his writing going trench to trench is like it is out of this world. I would not have liked to meet him in no man's land. You could tell he's fascinated that despite how destructive this is and how little you can do about a complete mortar barrage that could just disintegrate you, he was still fascinated that the human can endure and thrive in that environment. So it could be so bad that he's curled up in the fetal position and the mortars are coming so intense, like more than anything any of us could possibly imagine, to the point where all you hear is one continuous noise, not individual explosions. And he's being bounced on the ground, and all he could do is just start laughing. That's it. There's nothing left to do but laugh because of how completely ridiculous the situation is and outside of his control. And many people literally went insane in that situation. The fact he didn't was a testament to his mental strength and how he viewed it and how he viewed the strength of the human being. And so he would riff on that again and again and again, just walking through his experiences and describing the world with all five senses. And then every now and then he would inject a sort of philosophical reference that blows your mind. Like, how in the middle of this did you maintain your sanity and then find something beautiful about the human condition? So I just went on a while, so you can go wherever you want with that one. But he is a fascinating man.
Yeah, he's absolutely, I think, absolutely fascinating. The Storm of Steel, that's his record of his experience in World War One. Some listeners might know about the Battle of the Somme, a month-long battle. I should say months-long battle. Really terrible trench warfare. Many famous figures of the time were there: C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, Robert Graves, and I think he has this. Afterwards, he becomes a war hero, as you said, and he's always had a perhaps like Seneca in some ways. He's had a reputation of at once a hero, a kind of sage, but also a morally ambivalent figure, either because of his politics, because he didn't resist the Nazis enough. I think there's accounts of him protecting people in Paris, protecting Jews in Paris, but he didn't take perhaps a strong stand others expected of him at the time. So it's always a very difficult man to judge. It lived almost a century. The man lived almost the entire 20th century.
Which doesn't make sense given how many times he was shot, blown up, and how much he smoked. Like you have good genes or something. That's remarkable. He was also
Yeah,
gassed too. Let's not forget that.
I think went through some of the most pivotal moments, of course, in both halves of the century. Some of his later works are on introspection. You sort of wrote his version of The Doors of Perception. Almost, it's a book called Approaches, about psychedelic experience broadly, not just drug infused. A very interesting work that's difficult to go through, as you
Yep.
say. He's parts of it read smoothly. It's a kind of almost is very imagistic, sort of picturesque writer, and it's very easy to pick up for a while, and then at some point things become a bit murky and abstract, as you say.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to try out new thoughts, that's for sure.
How do you? I think something that I've noticed in terms of a connection to Stoicism, especially as connected to war, he has a striking passage where he notes the behavior of some of his comrades, furious at the fact that I believe the British killed one of their friends, one of their brothers in arms, and held nothing but hatred in their heart for the British. And he notes that they didn't understand the objective nature of war, which in a way sounds cold, but in another way seems totally correct. I don't know how you connect to that passage, but he does have these kinds of passages where it seemed like he was able to see war as a less than personal thing, in comparison with other people who, of course, see it as a deeply,
Is
deeply
the
personal
example you're
matter.
talking about, so Younger was talking about members of the German army being upset that the British killed a German soldier?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's something you get from his writing is his respect for the enemy. Like
Hmm.
he never talks about hatred. Even in the middle of a firefight, he writes about one of his last great battles, the one where he was shot and pretty much almost had his end. I mean, he was shot multiple times. This was the one that almost took him out. He was talking about going trench to trench, and he was just talking about how this enemy machine gunner. I think there was a group of three of them. He saw two of them run away, and one man stayed on the enemy machine gun. And he just kind of paused and just admired, like, what a hard man. Like, this is a worthy enemy. This is someone that I can respect, even though this guy had a machine gun trying to kill him. That's not normal. Like, so he's certainly not a normal combatant, but he did stay objective on that. To him, it was all business. He even wrote about during the same battle. He remembered shooting one of the Scottish Highlanders. He got a letter from that Scottish Highlander after the war when that Scottish Highlander read the book and said, "Hey, that was me. Like, you shot me." And they were pen pals. It's like he had this elevated mindset where he was always above the fray. And again, it's not normal. Typically, you're either an abstract thinker, a philosophical, introspective, thoughtful human being, or you're the executor. Almost never do you get the same person who could flick that switch and become one of those between in a very short period of time. It's exceptionally difficult. And then even more rarely can you be both at the same time. And I
Hmm.
get the impression he was actually both at the same time. That could just be the way he wrote after the fact, but you almost get the impression as he was doing the trench to trench warfare, he was still elevated above the fray. He was still able to be both aggressive and lob the grenades and throw the machine guns. And then while doing that, admire the courage of an enemy trying to kill him until he could flank and kill that enemy. That's why reading his work, kind of certain parts of his work where he's kind of in the zone and less abstract, you read that and then I kind of look up and I look at the world in a different way because he flowed with it. He literally flowed with the good and the bad, almost as a form of poetry. He even said, "The task is life, but the adventure is poetry." It's like he saw that the mundane, concrete execution of each task as taking place in a poetic context at all times. That's a way to live. Maybe that's why he
Hmm.
made it to 100 because he was just stimulated and he loved it the whole time. But that's the vibe I get. And your point about respecting the enemy is, I think, fundamental to who he is. So if people want to judge him for not going too hard against the Nazis, I'd be wary of casting a moral judgment like that until you've ever been tested in the same way. Like he was an exceptional human being. He did stay away from morals. He was deliberately morally ambiguous because he was so tutored in war. Again, it kind of changes your perspective on what things should be when you realize just how bad it can get. And if you want, it's just coming down to good and evil. I mean, sometimes to defeat the evil, you need to do things that don't meet the virtuous life as defined by philosophical influencers, for example. It's not happening. We wouldn't be here
Mhm.
if that were the case. So like that adds a whole curveball. That it's funny too. Like in philosophy, it's kind of changed over time. Philosophy used to be the domain of people who lived in the real world and interacted with the real world. Socrates was a combat veteran before a philosopher. Philosophy now has become more of a profession than has become a way of life. And I think it's been divorced from the reality of just how bad things can get. And when you kind of academicize philosophy, it's easy to come up with this just outrageous moral judgment of the world on how things should be that very quickly go out the window the second our privilege is taken away.
Mhm. Yeah, certainly we've become more specialized, not just in the philosophical domain, but in our careers as well, and perhaps even interests. And Socrates, Jünger, are sort of, I think, counterexamples to that. You have the man who he's almost at one point he seems like the ultimate masculine hero, and then he's also interested in studying insects, and then he's curious about exploring the bounds of consciousness. So he sounds like a hippie, but then if you read his other works, like, no, this man is no hippie at all. He's almost like an old German aristocrat, really, but an adventurous one.
Yeah,
Um,
he was
totally
an
fascinating
independent
figure.
thinker for sure. I mean, he also the hippie's interesting. Like, and I know what you mean. Like the last person you'd think would be sort of hippie-ish, but he kind of was in a way. Like he equated a lot of the horror of World War One and World War Two, this industrialized, mechanized warfare, with the economic system we invented. So he's almost like an early postmodernist in a sense. He's like, listen, this world is getting beyond us. We're becoming cogs in this world. And guess what happens when you make people into cogs? You treat them like cogs. You put them on a battlefield and you butcher them needlessly. Um, yeah, he saw things originally. I think he saw them ahead of his time. I still think he did, and I admire his ability to go from ants to warfare to psychedelics. It's pretty powerful.
Have you read any of his novels?
I read The Glass Bees, and I have not read the other ones. I read The Glass Bees, and I didn't think I could do any more of his fiction. It did not strike me as deeply as his nonfiction.
Yeah, some of his. I've tried a few of them. I did enjoy On the Marble Cliffs, and there's a relatively recent new translation of it that I can't speak to its accuracy by any means, but I thought read very well.
I got to check it out. I have to check
And,
it out.
yeah. So, and I think you get, at least it was easier to me to see that there's the same man who wrote that and Storm of Steel and his philosophical essays of his that I've read. Then I've tried The Glass Beads, Hume'sfield, I believe, as the name of his other novels, and those were harder for me to sink my teeth into, as it were.
Yeah, he wasn't shy about experimenting with writing styles and techniques and ideas. That's why it's super hit or miss. And I stay close to Storm of Steel. What was the other one? He had the other one that was super striking was an elaboration on the last battle, Fire and Blood. Super gentle title, but like he gets a little bit deeper in that last firefight where he got shot in the chest. And yeah, the philosophical musings he injects into the middle of that horror, it's incredible stuff.
Yep. And another work worth mentioning, I suppose, is his diaries from his time in Paris, and also quite readable.
Nice.
Um, awesome. Well, anything else you want to touch on?
No, that's awesome. I genuinely appreciate it. It's been a good time. What about you? Anything else you want to cover?
I don't think so. Where can people find your stuff?
What then? Like whatthen.org. What then? Epictetus, when he was interrogating his students, would say "tiun." So in Greek, that means "so what" or "what then." So I named my Substack after that. Whatthen.org. You mentioned Zerise. Zerise is my company. We're an AI company trying to stop gun violence in America, so we could detect guns. We're detecting guns outside elementary schools, subway platforms, grocery stores, etc. You name it. That's been a good mission, and every week we're getting guns where they shouldn't be. So yeah, those two things are it.
Perfect. Well, I've enjoyed this. Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for listening to Stoic Conversations. If you found this conversation useful, please give us a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you use. and share it with a friend. And I'd like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. Do check out his work at ancientlyre.com. And please get in touch with us at stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback or questions. Until next time.